Uh, okay, thank you, everybody. So we are here really to share our journey. We've heard a whole lot about various aspects of data issues and data privacy, data collection, and all of that. And we wanted to share our journey at Coca-Cola with, in terms of just managing our data assets and how that comes to life for day-to-day research, such as a kind of surveys and tracking studies and things like that. So there's been a whole lot of data that we now have that we never had before. In the last few years, we've generated a whole lot of data that we can now use to inform our insights, and as well as dig deeper into those insights to answer business questions and all of that. So with all of this data, there comes a challenge of organizing ourselves as a company around that data. And I want to showcase to you how we have handled that challenge. With that, all of that data, we needed to evolve our capabilities and our organization in order to just stay competitive. And in order for those capabilities to come forward in terms of supporting business decisions and just learning more about our customers and answering business questions. The goal really was to become a truly data-driven organization. So this is the story of how we kind of got there. So in about 2 years back, we created a specialized data strategy team within Coca-Cola. And this team essentially combined data strategy as a function along with decision science group, which we already had, and created an organization that was able to work with IT, work with MDM, which is our master data management, and essentially organize ourselves around our data as a kind of unifying force to kind of be able to use all of this data in sync with one another. This next slide, I'll just dwell a little bit here. But this really personifies our process and our organizing principle in here. You have those the 4 circles: access and acquire the data, activate and certify, consume and understand, and customize and predict. And we'll go a little bit into this. But all of this data that we have, that we own, that we purchase, that we acquire via surveys or any other mechanism, that's all on the far right of the screen. Amongst this data, we also have consumer surveys, and later in the presentation, we're going to be talking about how we modernize our surveys to kind of future-proof them in order for this data to be accessible and usable with all the other data that we have. So just a kind of drill down into each of those 4 circles. Access and acquire is all about gathering all of that data and creating a data portfolio. And once you have a data portfolio, just like we have brand portfolios and all of that, if we take an approach of data portfolio, that allows us to do is to organize that data and be ready to have it be consumed. As a part of this, here are the kinds of questions we ask. Is this data that we really need? Is this going to be helpful for us, especially when it comes to buying new data streams? But also, this applies to some of the primary data as well. How does any new data stream that we acquire fit in with and complement with all the other data that we have? The second thing here is managing that single data portfolio. And what happens is that all of this data that's coming to us is all very different data, very disparate data. So how do we organize all of this data and connect them into a data set that actually It's very nicely in a matrix. So this is all about creating a data lake, ingesting the data into the lake, so it's accessible to all of our associates all across the company. The third is all about performance reporting, tools for self-serve analysis. So once the data is in, how can people take that data, do analysis, answer questions, and all of that? And there are two types of business questions. Ones that are simple to answer, like what's my market share? So yeah, go to a reporting tool, do a visualization, there's your answer. Then there's other kinds of questions that are more complicated to answer, which might involve more deep dive analytics. And for that, you would be able to still tap into the data lake as a single source of truth and answer questions that are harder to answer, require some modeling or analytics and all of that. But the whole idea here is that we organize all of this, millions of terabytes of data, and have it be available so that we can do better analysis with them and answer business questions. As I mentioned earlier, our data assets also include our primary consumer surveys. So the next part of the presentation is going to be about how we future-proof those surveys. And these are consumer tracking surveys, and what was our approach to that.
Awesome. Thanks, Rajit. So we're going to talk about future-proofing. We're going to talk about the fact that this is all about the future of insights coming from a world of, what did we call it, Hillary? The big fat quant. The big fat quant. We have tracking surveys that are big, fat, quantitative things that you cannot put anything in the middle or beginning of. They all have to go to the end when new questions come up, when new issues come up, when the brand is making changes and adding innovations and the competitive response happens. So what do? We toss it all at the back. We toss the next thing at the back. Does anything ever come out, Rajit?
Nope.
Nope. So in order to future-proof, in order to start to be able to leverage what we can attain from survey-based ask-answer data from consumers and really get an understanding of our brand health, we have to re-engineer. We have to reimagine what these surveys are all about. And the last year and a half, that's the journey we've been on. So we wanted to take you through a little bit of what that journey is and the partnership that it entails. So our overall goal was to have actionable, accurate measures of consumption. So our drinker base, how many folks are drinking each one of our brands. We need to understand our equity, what our brands mean in the minds of consumers, and how much of an edge do they provide. Are they differentiated? Are they salient? Are they driving something of meaning for that consumer? We need to do it in shorter, device agnostic, mobile first, future-proofed ways. We have to be consumer-centric in the way we think about and ask a question and show them stimuli. We have to have dynamic modules to be agile. We need to be flexible and adaptable as we go. So we're going to walk through a couple different things. We've got added capabilities that we've put in place, improved surveys, and overall refreshed content. So as we get into added capabilities, we looked at holistic brand health measurements and a couple of new modules that we want to take you through. So overall, our holistic brand measurement starts with consumption. So it is the measurement of our drinker base. How many people are drinking each of the different brands, both ours and competitive, in the world over the last 12 months, over the last month? What's the gap between I've drunk in the last 12 months, but not in the last month? And how do I use some of these brands more occasionally? What about when I get into last month and I start to drill down to a frequency standpoint? So from soft drinks to kombucha to waters to orange juices across the spectrum. So giving us frequency by brand, giving us some of those churn metrics, are we attracting new to the brands? Who are we bleeding out? Equity from a top of mind awareness standpoint, some imagery, some positioning elements, and getting into the brand edge components, Much of this journey was certainly Burke working with Coca-Cola, but as we have found, and we talk a lot in our industry about the partnership that a supplier and a client has. But the partnership goes beyond. The partnership goes to InfoTools and what happens after we're done with the data and they take it and bring it to life. The partnership goes to Kantar and us leveraging, go figure, the right tool at the right time in the right respect was the MDF, the Meaningfully Different Framework. So partnering across our industry, talk about the future of insights. Breaking down silos and having this collaborative experience for a client over time. That was different, right? So one of the cool things that we put into place is a restructuring or a reimagination of the architecture. So having people come into a survey as a rep sample and then start to break out by categories. And modularizing this survey gave us a lot more flexibility and agility. One of the modules that we created was around trend tracking. So we talk a lot about trend spotting, right? But over time, can we start to see the penetration, the prevalence, the incidence of different trends and what's happening as an organization needs to make bigger bets? Where, I'll use kombucha again. Can we back up 5 years and say, will kombucha be a trend? Will it just be a fad? When will it start to really get traction? When do we start to see that build? And then we take, like Hillary was saying, take and put in segmentation components to say, this group of people at this occasion for this day part in this way, and start to see that come to life. So within our survey, at scale, we're going to have trend tracking over time. As well, we're in a world of agile. We're in the world of needing to move and grow with the business and make those changes so that we don't have that append at the back of the survey that never gets out. We created a flex space, a 3-minute dynamic module that we can use for innovations. We can use for communication evaluation. We can use for hot topics that come up. Dig in, get in, ask the questions, keep it in for a couple of months, find out what's going on, and get it out. This becomes probably our most expensive real estate, if you will. We're thinking this is our penthouse, where the brand teams are going to be fighting for the ability to have some of their questions in. And we've developed councils. We've developed councils to be able arbiters at a cross-category, cross-brand level to be able to step back and say, okay, this really deserves this flex space for this month. This doesn't. So how do we start to work through that? So that's about the metrics that we get. But how we do the surveys became very important. We needed to get away from the big, fat quant. And we had ballooned to over 34 minutes in length. It's not fair to do to a consumer.
Only 34.
Only 34. So how do we get to under that magic 25 number where we can start to truly be able to engage from a mobile standpoint and be truly mobile first and device agnostic? That restructuring allowed us to do that. We were able to then, as we get into this framework and be able to have things render on their phone and still see the imagery and still be able to move through and not have as much scrolling up and down or left and right, it opens up from a sample standpoint all sorts of opportunities. We don't have a sample, we don't have panel. So we're one of the largest purchasers of panel in the world, actually. And for these surveys, we're blending 13 different panels on a day in, day out basis in order to serve the ongoing needs of these trackers. In order to open up our panel resources and how we can get some of them more hard to reach, having mobile enabled, being able to be shorter, being able to be smooth in the way the process works for them, it opened us up from a panel standpoint, reducing some of our costs and allowing us to get to some of those more tough to reach groups. we were on a journey from an interface standpoint. So we looked at all sorts of different ways in which things could be rendered. So we were looking at bank websites. We looked certainly at the, what is the acronym? The GAFA, Google, Amazon, Facebook, Alibaba, and did I miss one? May have missed one in there. Then, and said, okay, how are they doing this? How are the one question survey people doing it? How are they looking at it? So as we put these metrics in, and as we re-engineered and redesigned the survey from a mobile-first standpoint, we put metrics at the back end of our testing process to say, okay, we certainly have timestamps. How long did this take? And right now we're sitting at about 21 minutes with our 3 minutes of flex space. We're sitting at 21 minutes of our core, right? We asked a question at the end saying, okay, about how long did it take you to do this survey? And over a 3-month pilot, we found that people are on average taking about 21 minutes. They're telling us they thought it took about 17. It was our most surprising and happy.
I mean, interview length is one thing. From a commercial aspect, you want to keep it under, under 24 minutes. But if it feels faster than that, then the survey is probably more engaging. And that's one of the goals as well, to get that engagement. Because we don't want, what we don't want is a very long survey in which people are just answering questions and, and it becomes a monotone. So this helps us get past that.
Smooth, quick, fast, fluid, those are all the words that we used in we did a design brief for the survey. So we had actual design criteria set up, and then we had a technical spec that went with that design brief so that we knew, okay, are we hitting these things? And what does smooth mean? What does smooth look like from a consumer standpoint? And then did testing to bring people in and do UX testing and watching them and having it display and having them talk in their thought bubbles about what they were seeing and feeling as it went through. From a refresh content standpoint, we're going to show you one of the gamification pieces. We made a little game out of the unaided awareness standpoint. So consumers have 30 seconds to tell us all of the brands that they can think of and be able to type in. And in our testing, we actually found that by doing this versus just asking straight up, they were giving us on average 2 more brands by limiting and holding them tighter or more controlled in their responses and putting that time pressure on them than if we just opened it up and asked them. Yes, sir.
How do you know the results you're getting are valid or as valid as what you were doing before, though?
We're in a process of test retest right now, right? So you've heard the analogy of, okay, so you're building a plane while it's in flight. Well, we're not doing that, but we're flying a plane and we're building on the side. So we're looking at key metrics of those elements of consumption, of brand equity and edge, and seeing, are we seeing things align or not in our reimagination and how we've restructured things. Some things are aligning quite well. We've got a few things that aren't. That comes to when you're doing tracking work, when are you willing to make that change? When are you willing to say you're going to break the trend? And when was the truth that was, and now the new truth is? That takes a lot of hand-holding and a lot of comfort from the company standpoint.
Yeah, and the initial results have just shown that it's absolute scores on certain metrics might be different, but the rank order of different brands is exactly the same. So it's kind of like a scale shift, if you will. And also, we have some newer questions that we didn't have in the old survey. And it's at a different pace because it just, it's a very snappy survey, and just the way the questions have been designed are with a view to ease of answering and all of that.
So, and I'll say one more thing before I pass it back. So as we put all of this together, it then is getting ingested into the data lake. and it's all coming into that large reservoir of data and information, and we're starting to understand what linkages and what areas we can start to see how things are playing out from a behavioral standpoint to a claim standpoint, and how we're going to build from, think about this morning, how we're going to leverage AI tools and machine learning tools to start to bring these things together.
Yeah, so and this is where this future-proofing, this specific tracking study lands in the overall data portfolio that we would have, and what's really important is, of course, all of our tracking studies is more in the region of assess and acquire, but the future-proofing principle really applies to all aspects of this data value chain. We consider these data streams to be assets, data assets that we invest in, and we are, we're going to have to utilize in an intelligent manner. But the real value of all of this is going to be not just what the number from the tracking survey is, or the analytics within the metrics of that survey, but how do we then triangulate this in an ecosystem of different data sets to get to value-added analytics. It's not just the survey data alone, but how can we derive more insights by marrying different data sets, analyzing and cross-analyzing all of that data. So that's the future we are looking forward to, having just been on this journey. And over time, we want to be able to pretty easily blend different sources of data and do the analysis across data sets. I think that was it for us.
The question is, what software did you use with that gamification 30-second counter?
We created it. We built it in-house.
Can I borrow it?
Give me a call.
Hi. One thing we talked about earlier today was data literacy. I heard that you kind of opened up this data lake to everyone. How did you upskill people to learn how to use all of this data that they have their hands on?
Okay, so we are in that journey of opening it up to everyone. The data lake part of our journey is only partially complete,
Okay.
because there are so many hundreds of data streams to pipeline in. I'm just using the language Lake colleagues use. But once all of that is done, I think there's two aspects of it. One is one is going to do with just the reporting and the consumption of that data. For that, we would be building BI tools that are targeted to specific audiences so that we can get the data in a sensible manner. And then for the analysts, decision scientists, the data nerds who want to actually do the cross-stitching of the data, it'll be something more sophisticated than that. So access the data to the analytics.
One more question.
Rajit, so how do you manage the issue of trend break? I mean, having worked on this specific study on the vendor side, I know Coke can be very sensitive to the issue of trend break. So even if it is for the better, right, with future-proofing and all the great enhancement that you guys talked about, how are you managing that?
Yeah, great question. So there are two parts. One is that you need to inspire organizational courage. So you need to bring in the people that really are good at this stuff, whether it's the interface, and you need to be able to kind of inspire the organization to, to make that trend break and and then manage through it with communication and all that. One thing that I did not mention here is that we are going to be doing a year worth of parallel tracking. So the old survey will not discontinue up until a year after we've collected new data. So there's a 1-year overlap. So certainly you can talk about, you won't lose any business continuity in making year-over comparisons if that's what you want to do. So that's one way we're managing it, but most of it is just inspiring the organization to be like, well, you'll have new data, you'll have more capability, you'll have more relevant metrics, and easier questions will be easier to answer as a result.
Much like as you build a communication plan and a commercialization plan for segmentation, we're on the forefront of doing the same. So going out and doing key stakeholder interviews to bring them into the fold and say, this is what's going on, start to build some ambassadors that can talk about, okay, here's the enhancements, here's what we're losing, here's what's going to be different, and let them be the first pebble and let the ripples hopefully expand. Okay.
Were your surveys blinded? And a second question to that is, how do you think that takes away or adds to the insights that you get?
So the surveys are blinded in the sense that the respondents don't know that it's a Coca-Cola survey. They know it's a beverages survey. And then we ask about the brands in the category. So that's all. And we want to keep it that way because we don't want biases or the love of hate of brands to keep it in the survey. So that's how we do it. And also the interface that you saw was pretty much we used as blue, which is one of the only colors in which we don't have a drink. So.
Thank you.